Всем привет. Меня зовут Газизова Светлана. Я работаю в компании Swordfish Security. Ну, надеюсь, многие.
I'm Svetlana Gazizova. I work for Swordfish Security. There I'm head of consulting. And apart from that, I develop training courses and I read them as DevSecOps and OPSEC trainer. And I'm a lead developer of this great framework I'll be talking about. So we'll be talking about secure development frameworks. I'll talk about the approaches we have today, what we have done, how we deal with it, and why we have decided to go public with what we have done. Well, I don't think that I'll share a lot of new things with you. I'll start with some background. IT security guys are few and far between, and OPSECs, well, even worse there. We don't have the guys, or the guys come from other walks of life, and there are issues in terms of their skills. The second issue, information security and OPSEC. So I would say that these guys are not pretty much on the radar of the top management. So they are more focusing on the functions, design, and the customer success things. And the information security is kind of overlooked. And the third issue is that information security, they come to development and they say, let's do it safe. And, the developers say, we don't understand this, we are not going to do anything. We can say, well, we are in the same boat, we should walk together. That's not the case. It looks like that. Okay, the people come to destroy the functions, to truncate everything, to interfere with us, and so on. So we don't want to hear this. And the next thing is that the 90% of the things done outside of Russia are not going to work in Russia, like the frameworks, approaches, and the standards, and the other things. They should be adapted. Well, when people say, okay, please introduce the static analysis, we see that the companies install it for one app, which is not critical, with the 3 developers, and they say, okay, we have done it, we have installed the SaaS, great. Okay, that's a problem. What's the solution? We need a framework. So the things we have today don't work, so we know why now. Okay, a few words on the terminology. I believe that most of you have heard this. Nevertheless, framework is a recommendation, and standard is declarative. There they are split into domains, so this kind of general structure. Inside we have practices. These are the things inside the domains and practice. Then we have initiatives. So we have several initiatives in a practice. So we have branches, streams. These are the activities in parallel for one timeline, and we have a security champion. And this is a good guy for security coming from development. Okay, let's talk about the frameworks. Let's call them this way. Well, BSIM is in the center, very popular. Everybody is using it. Not always the way BSIM meant it to be used, but anyway. Well, OpenSAM, which became OSM, Microsoft offspring, and BSA SSF, which looks like the framework more than others. You can see there the ASVS. Well, I have a standalone slide on them. Well, it wouldn't come here if at least 1 or 2 companies would say that they are developing the development based on the ASVS. I've heard it about 7 times. So I believe that's an issue when the testing standard is used framework for secure development. So you bring it to the architects and you tell them do it this way, or you send it as a test. Okay, that's okay, but this is not a framework. It's not about building processes or other important things. What do we have in Russia? Okay, in Russia we have things which look like frameworks. This is the national standard 56939 and 15408 national standards. Okay, the processes are there described by these national standards, and they're described pretty well. So if you start doing it, okay, it will work out. But the question comes, why are we not using it? We have the processes, the documents, this is all updated. Why are we not using it? Because people don't understand it. And we are facing it, and very regularly. Since we come to the company and we hear that there is a request for secure development based on the national standards and other standards, we say, why are you not doing it? And they say, we cannot understand these words. So we do understand because we have dealt with it a lot, but this is still an issue. How's it happening in practice? Okay, the companies coming to us with some work done. They started doing some secure development, and this is how it happens. They take a national standard, they cannot understand it, they put it aside. Then they take a framework, they cannot understand it, they put it aside. And then time comes, say the manager would come or the regulator, they develop their own methodology. Sometimes it looks more or less convincing, but sometimes it looks like translated SVS or like a combo of the national standard and the framework. Well, you cannot enumerate things, understand the current level of maturity, and you cannot understand the process, where you are going. So this is the second case. Once we had a funny situation. We came to a client, everything was nice and fluffy, so we are asking about the premises, why they need it. They say, okay, we need it. Okay, and the developers say, a year ago, we started introducing static analysis, we started doing SSDLC. We say, okay, what was the tool used? They mention a tool. This is not an open source tool. This is a vendor and not a cheap one. We say, great, and how is it working? And then silence came, about 30 seconds. Okay, we're there, so we thought maybe we should change the question. We say, how is the tool working? What do you like, what do you not like? They say, we don't know where it sends the messages. So for a year, they just paid for the license, and they couldn't figure out where the messages from this tool would be sent. Well, I would say this is an obvious issue. Well, when we come, we say that secure development is based on three pillars: tools, process, and people. So instruments is the lower level, it can be replaced. People is the highest level, the most important one. And similarly, behind all this importance of people, we forget about the processes. And we see some people who are more or less okay with some tools. So they have some kind of training in terms of approach or regulatory things, and we have the tools which are kind of apart, and they don't have any understanding of how to use them. And this brings us to this situation. We have the tool, so nominally it is there, it scans things, and they say, okay, we do scan, but nobody knows the results of this scanning. Okay, if we bring it all together, we can conclude that the framework is not there. So we have some maturity levels, SAMs, SAMs, and so on, and we should develop our own framework. And the second issue stemming from it is that the use of these maturity models is kind of against the Russian legislation and standards. So quickly, we have some laws talking about restricted access to information, and here you can see the commercial secrecy law. It can develop like that. All the maturity models tell us that you should try to be as open as you can when introducing your development processes. Meaning, if you're introducing a tool, you should tell everybody, your portal, Wikipedia, and everywhere that this is great. You have done it, speak about it at a conference. If you have an incident, please publish this information, mention this. It will be great. The commercial secrecy law tells us that the company should determine what is good or not good. And here, legally, the company can ban this information from publishing, making it available to a portal, and the OPSEC guys would send this there. And so the issue is clear, and the major issue is that we don't have the process at all. So what does it mean? If we introduce BSIM, we have 122 practices there in the latest version. If you use all this, it will work and bring you the results, at least some minimal results. But you should understand that we are talking about implementations of small companies who cannot implement everything at once. Nobody can do it. So we start with pinpoint deployment of analyzers, tests, training, which can be bad. And finally, the process is not there. We have some pinpoint scattered around tests. So once upon a time, somebody came to me to say, Sveta, please introduce SSDLC. I didn't know what SSDLC was. I looked up, I found some similar words, and well, I just started dealing with it. I decided, okay, I need to analyze, well, to use the static analyzer. So that's the day of the static analyzer. And I decided, okay, that the stat analysis should be introduced. And this will let me say that this is OPSEC. Okay, you just look for a solution, you procure it, and you install it if it's open source, and then you roll it out throughout your other apps in the company. Bingo, it works. No, it doesn't. It doesn't work like that. And the worst thing is that I still hear this, that deploying SAST is a simple thing. This is the first level practice. You just buy it, you install it, and everything is great. No. Here is the list, the checklist. 30 initiatives to be performed to say that you have static analysis. So these are the 30 activities. I'm not sure whether we can zoom in. Hopefully you can read it. So these are the things to be done to make the static analyzer work in your company. So the previous slides, number 1, analyzing the solutions. And this is item 7. So we have a lot. We have a lot of prerequisites as to go and start analyzing the solutions. And this is okay. I should understand the code base, the budget, the risks and the constraints. I should understand the team and what the developers can do and whether they're willing to do it. And this is without the subtasks. Each of these initiatives has within it a number of tasks which will be, well, some small steps. Okay, this has been the preface. Now I'll talk about the more serious stuff. We have dealt with a lot of clients, and I believe that I have worked with several dozen of them. So I can say that we know a thing or two about it. Okay, this is the structure of the framework. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, so we use this tree-like approach. We have the domains, practices, initiatives, and tasks. Every framework has it in a fashion. So it can be the national standard or a foreign standard mentioning this as well. What did we add? The completion conditions and the profits. Okay, the completion conditions. I believe that this is a very important thing. Very often, any practice, it can be not the endpoint one, and you cannot say when it's nice and we can recover, for instance. So they are at the initiative and task level, depending on the block and the content of the initiative and task, and they are a kind of end sentence. You read it, you compare it with what is happening now, and you can say, yes, it's cool, we can tick the box and start doing other things. And profit is a good thing as well. It lets you communicate the ideas of the top management, and you can reach it with what or why we are doing it, why we need this practice and not any other practice. Why do we need this element right now? A few words about the content of the framework. So the baseline thing should be the management domain for secure development. This domain has a lot of good things, including risk assessment and threat modeling. Threat modeling is often forgotten about by OPSEC. Well, indeed, this is really important. Modeling threats when you are doing secure development. This is not like, having the Bible hidden in a drawer. So here we are talking about the rules, regulations, and other things, and you need to re-audit your process all the time. The next domain is the secure development platform. The platform has everything you can check in an automated way, and some things like design review. Without these practices, you shouldn't start coding or analyzing. Testing is also here, and this is not in terms of the functions or load test. Here we are talking about introducing some SEC elements into functional testing. The next domain is managing vulnerabilities. It can be mentioned as having two big parts to it. So the first one, we determine what we do when we see the flags. So who will sort out the defects, who will deal with it. And the second thing is what do we do with the running apps, meaning how do we analyze them, how we monitor them, what do we monitor, and what do we do. So for monitoring like that, we often need external experts. And the final domain is training. Well, I like to say that each domain is extremely important. And this is especially true for training, because without that, you'll have a hard time starting anything, and especially the OPSEC activities. A very important thing in training we are trying to highlight every time we can is the need of awareness, continuous awareness. If the OPSEC guys or those who do ITSEC, so if we don't keep the developers interested, then the interest will fade away and we'll have some issues there. This is something to be focused on from the outset. Okay, this is the process overview. Do you remember the 30 practices? Here they are, split horizontally. So you can see the SAST. This is the practice which is one of these domains. Everything you can see here are initiatives. So the best way would be to develop schemes like that for every practice, since introducing SAST is impossible without pre-training and pre-risk assessment and many other supporting activities. They are all happening in different domains, and they often start with the same timeline or even before than we wanted. So the only right way here would be to understand how the process starts and how it ends. So the starting and the ending points. A few words about the practices I mentioned before, the initiatives. Here we can see the start of analysis. So you can see through the timeline that it starts, so it's not the first to start. Before that, we need some SSDL understanding in the company. We're going to introduce this initiative. We need to understand what is going to be built in, the teams, the number. We should understand the requirements, kind of quality of the stat analyzer. So what we shall see is the requirement there. Should it be Russian or not Russian? And what we should do with these identified vulnerabilities. And here we should start training. The developers and the information security experts should have this basic understanding of the tool, which was going to help us speed up the development process and improve the quality of the software we produce. Having analyzed all that and having received the list of the tools to be introduced, we will start the practical part. We will start introducing the stat analysis in the MVP projects. Okay, we introduce it in one or two projects by a couple of teams which are loyal to us and they are ready to install this tool. Then we determine the quality gates we need, then we fine-tune this. But here we have the first scan, and then we analyze the results and build the report for the management and for the developers. For the developers to understand that it's really bad and we need to fix the things. So at the development stage of this report, we have about 200 or 300 hits with about 80% of false positive results. Okay, what do we add to the framework? Okay, we have the decomposition by tasks and completion conditions. And here, introducing this static analysis to the MVP. So we have 3 tasks here. So determining the MVP project, deploying the tool, and determining those in charge for dealing with the hits. So to say that this is done and we can proceed, we should satisfy this completion criteria. So who'll be dealing with these hits and the tool should be working. Only then we can proceed. Okay, what should be the profit? So the OPSEC and information security guy will share it with the management. So it should be not technical. So we are saying that the stat analysis is the only clever way to cover a lot of code. It doesn't need credential, it doesn't need a testing bench, and so on and so forth. So let us roll it out everywhere. So we added some mappings, the framework mappings, BSIM, AVSAM, and the national standards mappings, because we are working in Russia. So these mappings might look like that. So they are overall there. So we have the domain, secure development, where we have the SS there. And here we have national standard here. Somewhere we have more details. So that's we did as well. And so this is for the BSIM. And sometimes it is more detailed. Well, we also have frameworks. Well, following my speech, I believe you should understand that this looks like that. And this is a really big thing and very ambitious for us. So I will highlight our next steps and what we are going to do. The first thing, which is crucial, is adding costs for implementation, the practices and initiatives. The more detailed we can be, the better. So we've talked about the profits, why we need them. So now let's talk about the costs, so that the company can really understand its capacity to implement this initiative. So we're not only talking about the money, saying that the analyzer costs some money. We're also talking about resources and the time to be invested. We want to add more mapping. We want to have more Russian national standards, which are about secure development processes. Maybe they talk about monitoring incidents and so on. So the ones having any bearing on it. And also the industrial standards, they should be developed. This is really important. And PCI is developing and so on. So we really need it. The third thing to do is to analyze the list of processes, to build the list of initiatives so that we review them regularly and assess their maturity. And we took it from BSIM, by the way. And every year we should have a new updated version. And this will help us stay afloat and be relevant. And the timeline should be added here. Here you can see some practices and their relative position. The timeline is missing here. So we want to have a kind of average of the time needed for an initiative to be introduced in a given practice. So we can take the average, say this will take a week, this will take a month, so that people can understand how long it will take to implement the whole process. That's it from me. I'd like to thank you and tell you that sooner or later will upload this framework. So please follow our updates. If you have any questions on the framework or any good ideas on how it can be extended or updated, or you can see something missing from it, if you want to introduce the processes following this framework, so you can use my Telegram or email for your comments. Thank you.
У меня вопрос есть.
Да, конечно. Я как раз живенько так
I
рассказала.
have a question. Yeah, I've been quick to have more time for Q&A. So, this can be a dumb question. I'm not sure. Well, all this stuff you have mentioned looks like that, as if it could be automated and sold as a product. Have you thought about it? Is it possible? Otherwise, why? Sure. I believe you can automate almost everything with the exception of the high quality work of the brain. So we'll have some issues trying to automate things. I mean, there'll be companies telling us, I don't want to introduce libraries analysis. Please remove it from the framework, and you'll have to do it. Well, I believe it can be introduced like a roadmap for measuring things, but this should be done at the orchestration grade tools. Thank you. I came later. Sorry if I missed it. The timeline was one thing I was missing, but another thing was some kind of order. I mean, we understand that we deploy the risk analysis and threat modeling. So I believe this is much more difficult than buying a tool, talking to developers, developing the CI/CD plugin, so you start doing something. Do you have any plans to introduce it? Well, this is something taking less time, so why not start there? So if we start with item 1, we can. So this can take a lot of time, given the approach of business to this. Hopefully, I understood your question. I believe we are talking about the maturity level. I didn't highlight it because we didn't go through this in detail. So we have some practices. Okay, threat modeling. It will be split by levels. We have some baseline threat modeling to be done to start developing the app, and we bring some recommendations, like the threat model should have some best practices, and then level 3 is your own data bank of threats, and then you have some private threat models. Okay, a follow-up question. We have TTM. And sometimes you just come, you start talking about threat modeling, and they tell you, we have TTM, goodbye. So maybe you have a smoke test analog, so we can go by some bullet points to understand, okay, we can do it, so go ahead, and then we'll have a backlog to deal with. Well, I've been scared. Me too. And hence the questions. Okay, I got you. If we go to SAST, threat modeling is not there because it's comprehensive, but we need some baseline risk assessment. Otherwise, they will beat you badly. And at TTM, in a way, this is a very good piece of advice. We'll put it into our pipe and smoke it. Thank you. What are the tools, apart from SAS, to be supported by your framework? So we know that secure development is not only about static analysis, but also the dynamic one and the interactive one, and the open source code analysis, which is really important now, because the things are developing in a way telling us that it has to be checked for backdoors. And another thing, the colleague mentioned time to market. So what are the metrics in your framework? The business has never cared and is not going to care about dry numbers. So they want the dynamics, the dynamics of change for vulnerabilities coverage, how many have been identified and fixed. So do you use the metrics in your framework? The first question, tooling. The tools which are necessary are shown here. The static and dynamic analysis, the components control, OCC, the containers control. And in Dest, we also have the EAST and fuzzing. Well, why fuzzing is not mentioned as a standalone practice? That's because we believe that introducing fuzzing in the companies under a level of maturity is not justified. So it can be done only by the advanced ones. And we're going to further develop this core. We'll be adding more practices to this, like app security or secret management. If you have any target proposals, we'll be glad to hear them. For the second part, other metrics. We have the secure development domain, and there we start with the SSDL, and then we have metrics. Well, the metrics mean that the company will determine on its own what it wants to track and trace. So we can bring forward some recommendations. So the framework is about recommendations. It's not restrictive. So we'll be talking about the things you can use to track tools. Inside the tools, we'll also have this advice on what you should monitor. So this is the number of vulnerabilities which can be fixed, and some very high-level metrics which will pop up somewhere in training the management. And it'll be telling this. We have found this great vulnerability. The other company didn't fund it, and they had to pay $500 million. So here we give some piece of advice, and the rest is to be determined by the company itself. Another question. Are you going to make this framework public? As I understand, it's in-house now. Well, indeed. Thank you. When we came to the clients and we wanted to start things, we had a motley collection of frameworks and standards, whatever. And time came when we decided to do it the way we see it proper. And now, well, that's what we have. We are going to publish it as an open source solution to the community so that people use it and help us further develop it, make it stronger in terms of the content and quality. Thank you. Okay, it's your own product and you want to add the community there. Yeah, we want. So this is one of open points. You can hardly do anything without the community because there are many companies. Thank you. A follow-up question. When? That's a good question. I believe this is going to happen somewhere in autumn, more or less, but I'm quite optimistic here. Okay. We have the regulator stack, and they have the methods for analyzing vulnerabilities and non-declared functionality. So how do you match this requirement with your approach? We haven't mapped this and this method or methodology. Well, we have plans to do this. The key element in the framework is that we don't want to go against anything. This includes national and foreign regulators. Well, this is against 56.539 rule. have a brief comment. The metrics and the framework. You can have the video from the previous speech days. Anton Mahalin, our colleague, spoke to the positive development group about the metrics, how they are to be built, how you can collect them, and how you can use them. Hello, I have two questions. Threat modeling. To model a threat for an app in production with a well-thought-through architecture would be a strange thing. But if this is a new app, it's very good for modeling. So do you have in this framework any split in terms of the readiness stage? Okay, we introduce these methods for the apps, so we will start coding, and these practices will be launched for the apps which are there installed for 10 years now. That's a great question. Indeed, we have things like that, but not for all the blocks. We don't have it in threat management. There we say that for any app, be it deployed or be it just at the idea stage, the threat model should be developed. Well, here I'm based on the Microsoft SDL, and there they have a gateway. So when we start developing a new app, we understand that we cannot remove the threats, we just don't launch it, and we just kill it at the initial stage, which cannot be done at the poorly coded app. Well, indeed, but this is a different question. So, the resources to be invested, whether it's justified. But we say that it should be done, because when you model the launched app, and how often, well, is an app, well, which is a core for the company, and dealing with them can be an issue. When you model this app, you can introduce some mitigation measures, and this will simplify life for you. And I have another question. The profits and the outputs, so things already introduced. Using SAST, for instance, you said that people who will mitigate the vulnerabilities, but you're not talking about the mitigation or, well, I mean, the metrics. It's not like having everything for everything, but more practical things. And for the practical things, you've mentioned that you're going to assess the cost of implementation. Well, you have the methodological recommendations. Do you envisage any assessments of the monetary profit you can generate? Thank you. That's a great question. We've done something in this field. We try to understand the return on capital employed in OPSEC. This is a standalone issue. Indeed, we want to have as much knowledge as we can there. So, which is not under idea, because otherwise the framework will be limited to the BSM likes. Gladly sharing all the experience we have, including the community experience one. Mikhail Parfenov, makes sense. I have two questions here. I believe that following the SSDLC, everybody wants to understand the extra labor needed from the developers. So if you use the SAST as an example, okay, if you have introduced this process, well, how much more we'll have to invest in terms of dealing with false positives and other things? So the extra capacity needed. Thank you. That's a good question. Well, it's almost 100% at the initial stage, at the development stage, but following 1 year, when people have learned how to work with it, then one extra person can deal with it. Say you have 5 people, one security champion will be 50% of labor capacity. Yes, he or she will do some development, but the major scope will be to deal with the defects generated by the tool. And this is the ideal case. Well, initially, any new process causes a lot of pain, and the important thing is that people cannot do it and they don't want to do it. And that's why the labor investment soars at this level. Thank you. The second question on the metrics. Using SAST as an example. Any SAST analyzer will update the rules and the core, and they can become smarter or dumber. And for the metrics, you can use a dashboard. And you can say that yesterday the product was in the green zone, no vulnerabilities, but today we have updated SAST, and we can see some vulnerabilities there. So in the teams, people take it quite negatively. So what's your position? How to talk to the teams about it, how to position it, and how to justify it, that the company has new technical debt now. So how to deal with it? There are two ways to do it. So, number one, you can say that this is inevitable. Please deal with it. So that's not our advice. So be friends, explain things to the teams, the things you have mentioned. And the second one was on whether you can automate it. So that's a great example why it cannot be automated. Since we believe that following every scan, well, ideally, I'm not talking about incremental things once 24 hours, I'm talking about more global things. So once every 2 to 4 days, you should revise the rules you have for the static analysis, and especially following an update. Well, usually it happens like that. We have an update, we have generated a lot of technical debt, and we don't forget about the developers. We come to them to help them. So we need the OPSEC department for this. They come together to be the guidance star for the developers. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? I believe there was another question here. Okay, thank you. That's me again. Well, following an audit on some PCI DSS, so you have some kind of scoring, like this is 2 scores, this is 5, and then it's standard to have 5 and you need 15, and you are in a bad shape. So do you have anything like that? Can I launch this framework to see, okay, I have done this, I haven't done that, this is 10 points, this is 15 points, for me to understand the more costly things and things to pay attention to, and other things. So are we going to have a metric like that? Thank you. That's a very good question and a timely one. Yes, we have this metric. So what's good about these frameworks like BSIMs and so on? So you can bring them to your CEO to tell you that you can see this net, this is the maximum, this is the current status, and we want to build the same thing. That's why we need the maturity levels. We need to further develop it. Talking about the baseline approach, that all the first grade level practices, which are mandatory, they'll be more in terms of points than the third level practices. So the Pareto rule works here. The 80% of practices will cover 80% of vulnerabilities. Why are we doing it? So the companies who can come to us, so we'll introduce it for them. And we want the small companies who have 3 developers there, we want them to use this framework to have this developed thing at least secure in some ways. Okay, one more question. Thank you very much. We have heard various questions answered, and here is my question. Looking at this as a developer, I have a team. Okay, we have 10 points and we need 15 points. So are we confident that this is not going to become just another framework without automation, like the national standard and the other previously mentioned frameworks? Now the question is, what makes you confident that this is not going to be just another framework? Thank you. When I shared this framework with my friends, my good friend told me, well, Sveta, we have a lot of practices for losing weight in the internet. Why are not people using it? And this brings us to the very first slide. We don't have enough competences, well, to use a Besim, well, SAM and so on. So they can be used in a good way when you are competent enough and when you have some expertise. So we make the process as transparent as we can with the tasks and with the completion criteria, so that those who used to be like me and now they open the framework, they read it, they shouldn't be scared away. They should say, okay, I split this big task into the smaller tasks and then I'll manage it. So this is a psychological trick and it helps a lot. So that's why I hope it is going to work. Okay, thank you. No more questions. Thank you very much. I believe I should pick the best question. Well, this guy, he asked a lot of useful questions and he gave us more food for thought. Okay, thank you very much.